Hi, I'm Stephen Orr. Here at Better Homes and Gardens, we really know it's finally spring when the test garden bursts into bloom and all the crab apples are full of fragrance and color. It's that time of the year that we get rewarded for that long wait over winter. Gardeners like me look forward to it because that's really the first big color statement we get in our gardens. Today we're going to talk about several different varieties. They're going to be very familiar to you. There's such a wide range of blooming trees and shrubs that you can tap into. Depending on your part of the country, you might want to research which ones work best for you. Today we have some different varieties that work in many parts of the country. We have quince, flowering quince, which comes in a beautiful white, a soft pink, and then a very strong hot pink color that is really noticeable, kind of a coral color that you see on the side of the road and can really almost stop traffic. It's so beautiful. We have magnolias. There's many kinds of magnolias. The earliest ones are the saucer magnolias and also the star magnolia. Both of those are great and very easy to grow. Sometimes these magnolias get hit by a late frost and will turn brown, but that's really the only downside of any magnolia that you might grow. Another big shrub that you may see when you're driving around, if you don't have it in your own garden, is forsythia. It makes a big gold fountain of yellow flowers. The rest of the year it's just leaves, but that one moment is why so many people grow it, because it makes such a big statement. People even plant it in long hedges so they get this long kind of fireworks display of yellow flowers. One of them that's less showy but still very popular with people is a pussy willow. Also, you can grow goat willow. Both of these willows come out very early in the year. They come out almost at the time of the crocuses. So it's one of the first things that will bloom in your garden, and these little catkins obviously are really nice texturally in the garden as well. So now you need to know when to plant. And for most trees and shrubs, it's exactly like you would do with most perennials. The normal planting season is anytime in spring. Most gardeners love to go to the garden store, as you know, around Memorial Day, late May, early June. Those are all really good times to plant trees and shrubs. You want them to have mild temperatures, lots of water. You don't want to be dealing with August heat. So don't plant in August, don't plant in late July, especially if you live in a hot part of the country. But if you live in an area where it's mild, you can kind of plant all summer. If you don't want to plant in summertime and you want to start doing some work in your garden in the fall, just be sure to start right after Labor Day and don't wait too long, because you really do want those plants to settle in. The cold temperatures will keep the roots from establishing themselves. Once you have the plant in the ground, the one thing you really have to keep in mind, you don't need to fertilize it. In fact, fertilizing young trees and shrubs is a bad idea. It can really burn the roots, so just let them work with the nutrients that are in the soil. But I would keep a close eye on them for watering. You do want to make sure that you don't overwater. You never want to see any standing water, but you want to make sure that the planting area is consistently moist. For most of us, that means about every 7 to 10 days. You'll give it a really long, slow drip, not where you just spray it a little bit with the hose. You actually want to put the hose there or put a drip line down and let it soak in for a long time. So there are three main ways you're going to find these plants packaged and sold at nurseries. The first one is the most common you're going to recognize from most perennials, is just this plastic bucket. The larger size you buy, the larger plant you're going to get, and some people do feel if you buy smaller sizes of some perennials and shrubs that they will grow faster, so that's just something to keep in mind. But this would be a really common size of this forsythia to buy. What you're going to do is pull it out of its pot. You're going to look at the roots, you're going to give them a little tickle, and then you're also going to place it in the soil at the same height that the top of the nursery pot is. So you can tell where the top of the nursery pot soil is. That's the top of your new hole. That determines the depth of the hole. And then you're going to want the hole to be as wide as you can make it within reason. So a couple of feet on either side would be really generous. If you can only do 8 inches on either side, that's fine too. Just do the best you can. And when you're filling it back in, just use good topsoil. Do not use potting soil that has any sort of chemical additives, because we don't want to fertilize these in their first year, especially because the young roots, we want them to not be burnt by any sort of chemical fertilizer. The second type of plant is a bare root plant, and that is the most economical. These can be shipped to you very easily. This is one we ordered from a mail order nursery. This is a forsythia as well, and this one has a lot of roots to it, which is really great that the nursery sent it with this many roots. Sometimes you'll get much smaller pieces, even just this big, with like a fraction of these roots. Both types, depending on the plant, will work well. What you're going to want to do when it arrives is unpack it as quickly as possible. Soak it either overnight maybe for 6 hours in a bucket of water, and then you'll want to plant it very quickly. And when you're planting it, you just dig a hole around the right size. You can see here that the top of the soil must have come up to about right here, because you can tell of all the residue. That's where the plant was buried originally when it was grown. And then you can put all those bare roots into the ground. I've actually seen people plant whole hedges with bare root cuttings. It's a really economical way to make a privet hedge, for instance. It'll grow pretty quickly. Within a few years, you actually will have a full-size hedge. Also, what other people do with bare roots, sometimes if they want to make sure, because they require extra care because they are so fragile, that you want to make sure they never dry out, that they really do have a lot of care and very good soil. Some people will kind of grow them in a holding area, like a vegetable garden or part of a flower garden, and just put them in ordinary garden soil and put them in a bit of a row, and then when they really start getting established, that's when they transplant them to a better spot. The last type of plant you'll find is much larger and probably the most expensive, but also the most established, is a balled and burlapped tree or shrub. Those come, you've seen them at nurseries out in the back. They're usually out on a kind of a field of mulch, and they have very large root balls. And that's the advantage of balled and burlap, is it's a lot of soil around very healthy roots. And when you plant those, you're just going to do the same sort of thing where you dig it to the right height, to the base of the crown of the plant, and then you're going to give as much space as you can within reason. And then you're also going to cut away any sort of, with wire cutters, any sort of metal wires, remove any sort of nails, any sort of signage. If it's natural burlap, you can leave it at the base, but I would cut it away from the sides. So you just want to make the environment as good as you can for your new tree and shrub to thrive. So once your tree or shrub is fully established and you have this great, beautiful thing happening every spring, you're going to want to know what the aftercare is. And one of the things that really confuses people is pruning. Simply put, you're going to prune most of these early spring bloomers right after they bloom, like maybe a week or so after all the flowers fade. That's the time to prune, because you're not going to cut off next year's flowers. You don't want to wait and prune late in the summer or the fall, because that's when those buds are being set for next year. So when you're pruning, you're just going to use very clean pruners. Bypass pruners are really good. Bypass means that the blades bypass each other, and you want to disinfect that with some alcohol, because one of the problems with using your dirty pruner is that it can spread some sort of fungal disease or some other disease from one part of the plant to another plant and cause trouble. And when you're pruning, it's hard to do on this one, but basically you're trying to prune out any dead branches. That's obvious. You can do that anytime, actually. And you're also trying to prune out any branches that are crossing in an awkward way. You just want to have an open middle of the shrub and have it kind of have a nice vase shape. So the more you prune, the more you get a handle on it. And most people are afraid to cut the plant. I think they think they're going to make a mistake or hurt the plant. Most plants like being pruned. It encourages them to make new growth and also to make more flowers. So with many of these plants, keep them in bounds. And when you cut, you just are going to cut right beneath or right at the node of a plant, so that you know that the cut's going to go the right direction, and you're going to do it at an angle. If you're very nervous about doing it, definitely give it a year or more and just let and see how the plant grows. It's never going to be bad if you don't prune over a year or two. It really is multiple years where you might want to go in and prune, but don't overdo it. You don't want to make a mistake. So just kind of watch the tree or the shrub and see how it's growing, and then you can really decide how you want to prune, or even invite a gardening friend over and have them show you how to do it the first time. So the last thing we're going to talk about with spring blooming trees and shrubs is how to force them. Now that sounds a little bit violent perhaps. You're coaxing them really more than forcing them into some early bloom. Really just a few weeks, maybe even a month, but it's a way for all of us who are so impatient for spring to come, it's a way to get some of that inside our house a little bit early. What you do in that case is you take a plant like a forsythia, which is very easy to force. Also quince and cherries are easy to force. And you'll take a forsythia when it's in bud. You wouldn't take it when it was blooming like this, but imagine this is just covered with buds. You'll cut it in the garden, you'll bring it in the house, and then you'll take it and you'll take it has such a woody stem. One of the ways you'll signal to the plant that it starts time to bloom is to give it more water uptake. So what I do is I cut it at a cross like this, one way, and then the other way, just in a cross. And you can be messy about it, nobody cares. That's letting a lot of more water go up inside the woody stem of the plant. Also, some people will smash it with a hammer. I don't tend to do that as much. I find it a little bit messier, but if you're having a bad day at the office, it might be fun to come home and smash some spring blooming stems. But for me, it's like the crossing works well. Also, it gives it the right amount of water uptake, and what you're going to do as soon as that happens is take your branches and put them in water. You can put them in buckets or floral buckets. Just make sure they haven't had chemicals inside, and fill that with nice cold water. Put them in a dark place like a closet or a basement. Some people wrap them in wet newspapers just to keep the buds a little more moist, and especially if your house is dry, which it will be at this time of year. And then after a few days, somewhere like 2 or 3 days, maybe 4, bring it out, put it in a warmer place, not in direct sunlight, and then it'll naturally start to bloom inside your house. So it's just a really nice way to get a jump start on spring, especially when most of us really can't wait for winter to be over. And the best thing about all these beautiful flowering shrubs and trees is that every year your yard is going to be the first one on the block to be in full bloom.